and
Sure,
we'll move forward.
I'm delighted to have a guest with us today. Her name is Lynn Lennon. Lynn runs Richmond Peak Performance. Lynn, do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I am a registered nurse and a brain trainer in Richmond, Virginia, and do a whole bunch of things, wear a lot of hats. I help people learn how to optimize their brain health and their total wellness, and help people to recover from brain injury, help people with learning disabilities, help people with congenital problems. I'm an adjunct to medical care at times, and sometimes I'm just a coach.
She wears lots of hats.
I wear lots of hats. It's hard to put in a nutshell.
That's terrific. Well, Larry, if you could start the PowerPoint, Lynn and I will start our conversation.
Right.
In the wake of COVID-19, I think a lot of us are seeing our kids and our students worry about what's going to happen to them in the wake of this college search process. And as I thought about anxiety and online classes and developing study skills, the person I thought I would call would be every time. So I thought Lynn could talk to us today a little bit about how parents can help students deal with their anxiety, perhaps how to help our students stay focused, and also how to approach online education. So we'll just kind of walk through some of this, and Lynn and I'll just have a conversation. And you guys who are on with us, feel free to ask questions in the chat box. And if we'll try to get to them as we talk, and if we don't, we'll email you at the end of today and be sure to answer your questions. Larry, I don't know that your screen is showing.
Margaret, you're gonna have to start the.
Okay.
You're gonna have to share the screen, because when I do it, it just dies.
Oh, well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, it's more than unfortunate. I don't know why it did that all of a sudden.
No problem. So the goal today is to really step back and think about, how do we manage our emotions, but also, how do we help our students through this process, and what that means for us as parents and for us as counselors, and even just for friends of students like that. I will start the PowerPoint. All right. And you've already met Lynn. You guys know that she wears a lot of hats. If you're joining us for the first time, Larry and I have been with College Solutions for many years. Larry is the CEO of College Solutions, and I manage the Richmond portion of College Solutions. We visit colleges, we counsel students, and most of all, we're very focused on finding the right fit for students. So we focus on finding the right college for students socially, academically, and financially. So we have a dropout rate of 3% versus the national average of 27%. So I always tell students we're not perfect, but we're pretty good, which is probably the worst marketing strategy there is. But that is what I tell. So you've heard about Lynn, and we'll share her bio with you, but I think you'll be more interested to hear what she had, how to help children manage their feelings. So Lynn, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to offer in the front end that I think that a lot of the young people that I work with, one of the challenges that they deal with regularly is they have a lot of cognitive distortions and they don't realize it. And oftentimes, I'm not a counselor, I'm a registered nurse, and I do biofeedback and neurofeedback, so I'm not allowed to get into counseling situations with my clients, but I refer them to a counselor, and there are many great counselors in town, and if you need a good one for this, you're welcome to message me, or I can give a list to Margaret that she can disseminate. But working with a counselor to identify your cognitive distortions can be really helpful. In the handout that I wrote up for this, I've cited where these common cognitive distortions come from that are listed here on the screen right now. And they come from a book that you can easily buy. It's an older book. You can buy the book and work through some of the exercises if you want. And there's also a handout that you can source online if you just simply Google it, that will unpack all of these common things. But a lot of young people don't realize it. They're not really looking at reality. They're looking at a distorted version of reality that they're running in their mind. And so one of the things I do is I hand out the cognitive distortion list and ask them to read through it every day. Just read the list and the little blurbs about what does it mean to be in overgeneralization mode, or what does it mean to be shoulding yourself, the should statement, and read through it. And if you simply read through it every day for a week or so, 2 weeks, it raises your awareness of it. And then as the child is in school, or as the child is doing their sports or whatever, and they come down hard on themselves, they might catch it and realize, oh, I was just magnifying. I was magnifying the negative. That's just not really true. So, that whole heading of feelings are not facts is really important. Feelings are valid and should be honored and whatnot, but it's really important that we get into reality. Another thing that I teach in my office a lot is I bring people into the awareness of when am I in my mind and when am I in reality. That's actually a huge foundational point of mindfulness, is to start to pay attention to when am I running the little gerbil narrative, and when am I actually here in the present moment, attending to the present moment and taking in real data as opposed to manufactured mental machinations. So I just thought that was an important thing. The next thing that we're going to get into has to do with fight or flight. And the essence of peak performance is learning also to recognize when am I in fight or flight and when am I not in fight or flight. The brain and the nervous system only have two main, that's great. Your brain and your nervous system only has two main modes of functioning. You're either in fight or flight or you're not. And fight or flight is the default. Nature knew that if we were running in fight or flight, that we were more likely to survive. And so that's why it's our default. It's the running from the tiger, so to speak, type of brain functioning. This first picture that you see on the screen that's in the upper left-hand corner is of a brain that is hindbrain shunted. And I should stop here momentarily and just tell you everything I'm going to kind of throw at you in the next few minutes is on the handout. So don't stress about not having to write it all down. I think this is so foundational. It should be taught in schools, and everyone should understand this about their own brain and be taught it at a young age. So the blue in this picture is representing blood flow. Blood flow, wherever the blood flow goes, the brain firing is happening. So when you're in fight or flight, the blood flow goes shunted to the bottom and the back of the brain, and that's because the limbic system, which is your fear brain and your survival brain, is fed from the bottom in terms of blood supply. The cerebellum and the brainstem are also highly engorged with blood. All of those regions are the best run from the tiger type regions in the brain. But as you might imagine, if you're taking a calculus test, all of the learning that you have accumulated over a semester is up here in the left parietal on the cortex in the gray matter of your brain up at the top. So it's not ideal to be shunted into fight or flight when you're sitting for an SAT or you're sitting for an exam for calculus or something. And additionally, all higher learning and all higher assimilation of knowledge happens on the cortex. So learning how to get cortical and stay cortical is foundational. The bottom picture on the screen is showing parasympathetic. And this is when we are in the rest and digest mode. So those of you who have attended yoga classes have probably heard these terms bandied about in yoga class. And the yoga teacher's always trying to get everybody to go into the relaxation response. And this is why. When we're in the relaxation response, we can A, rest well, and B, our digestion is turned on. And also, we have good amounts of blood flow to the entire neocortex of the brain, especially the cortex or the bark, which is the gray matter of the brain where all of our higher learning goes. So to learn how to, you can go and go to the next slide, that's great. So this little slide is demonstrating the oldest, most basic way to figure out whether you're in fight or flight or not, and that is by assessing your respiratory rate. Your respiratory rate is whenever you get above 10 breaths a minute, you are going into sympathetic fight or flight firing in the brain. And the faster the respiratory rate, the stronger the firing of the fight or flight mechanism. So one of the assignments I often give my clients is for the next week or so, I'd like for you several times a day to just check in. If you're able to count your respiratory rate yourself, please do, and just make a note, or have your mate or your spouse, your mother, brother, whoever, somebody check in and feedback to you. How many times a minute are you breathing? And some people don't even know how to assess that. So I'd just like to clarify, one inhale and one exhale is one respiratory cycle. And you're counting how many cycles are happening in a minute. Ideally, we'd like to see people breathe 6 breaths a minute or less. 6 breaths a minute in pranayama in the yogic scriptures is called the gateway to bliss. So once you get into these slower breath rates, it's very blissful and relaxing. But from a kind of a cerebral standpoint, if you harken back mentally to the last slide, when we are in these slower breath rates, that's when we're going to have the activation up here in the prefrontal cortex. So all the blood in that bottom picture is showing that it's up here in the prefrontal cortex. Why is that important? Well, this whole prefrontal cortex is where your executive function is. Your executive function, it kind of goes without saying what it is. It's where all your good judgment is. It's where your higher assimilation of knowledge is. The frontal poles of the brain need to be on for academic prowess and for doing well cognitively. This also happens to be the biggest energy guzzler that we have in terms of mitochondrial output and firing speeds. So you need a lot of blood supply here to run it well. So back to how are we going to do this? We're going to look at the rates of respiration and try to bring those down. Now it's important to understand that you need to, I gotta hurry up. You need to train this as a baseline. Don't wait until you're in 10 out of 10 fight or flight and then decide that you're going to work on your parasympathetic tone. You know, we work on having this better baseline all day, every day, so that when life throws challenges at us, we can adapt, we can go into turbo, meet the challenge, and then come back to our baseline again. So there are tools, and there are tools in the handout of different breathing exercises you can do to do that. So you go to the next slide if you want. So these were some suggestions for the students working at home. There are a lot of really important things to know. I'm a big believer in the students need to be set up for success. If you want success to arrive, you need to set the causes and conditions for it to arise. Students today have some pretty terrible hygienes, in my opinion, from sleep hygiene to light hygiene to postural hygiene. So one thing I teach all the students is to sit with a straight spine. Whether they're studying and working, whether they're in class, whether they're taking an exam. If you sit with a straight spine, you will have a faster, more desynchronized EEG. So in layman's terms, that means you're going to have this cortex, you're going to have a better chance of having this cortex on. Recumbent, relaxed, what I call the Netflix position, is associated with more alpha and theta in the brain, which allows too much subconscious and emotional content to come up. So discourage your young people from sitting in bed in recumbent positions with their laptop trying to do their work. Set them up in a workstation where they are actually sitting on their, sitting with a straight spine. One of the suggestions I had was to get a yoga ball chair or use a yoga ball for a chair. When you fire your core, which are your abdominal muscles, and you fire your cerebellum and basal ganglia for balance, you will axiomatically fire a node in the brain up here. So it's, again, getting cortical, staying cortical. That little bit of stimulus also makes the brain happy because motor stimuli, excuse me, motor stimuli and sensory stimuli and interpersonal stimuli are all like food for the brain and make the brain happy. I also really suggest that as much as possible they work in natural light or at least balanced light. Avoid man-made blue frequency type light. And it's really good to wear, I didn't grab my blue blockers, but really good to wear blue blockers when you're studying on the screens. Blue blockers are orange glasses, or they're special glasses that have a tint in them that help to minimize the blue that's coming off the screen. They have less brain drain from the flicker rate and from the blue frequencies coming off the screen. It's all in the handout. Do you want to unpack some of those things that you had on here, Margaret?
Yeah. Other things that Larry and I came up with just to help students study and to think outside the box about how to study and how to learn online are these resources listed here. Quizlet is something that students have been using for a long time, I think, but it's just a way to kind of create a way for you to remember what you're learning online. And I think if you're just sitting in the posture that Lynn described in the Netflix posture, you're not remembering a lot. So these kinds of resources can really help you remember and hopefully repeat and use the information that you need to. Some schools I know are changing the way they're grading in this last 9 weeks, but you still need this information for next year. So study, please. I won't go through all of them, but I also really believe in Duolingo. I was just talking about how nerdy my husband is, and I tell a lot of people this. Duolingo is a place to learn languages for free. This includes, I think, sign language, Swedish, French, German. Students, if you have nothing else to do besides watch horrible things on Netflix and Amazon Prime and Hulu, and I can name them all, pick up a new language. I can't tell you how impressive it is to a college, having worked on the college side, for a student to say, oh, and I just learned French for fun, or I just learned, Arabic for fun. Oh, wow. Like, that's really cool. That demonstrates curiosity and love of learning, both of which are major brownie points in the college admission process. So take note of that. And if you don't understand a concept being taught at school, reach out to your teacher or go to YouTube. Like, you guys are on YouTube anyway. Prep your orange glasses that Lynn talks about. I have some. My husband gave them to me for my birthday. So that's what old people get for their birthday, just so you know. But go to YouTube and type in, derivatives or whatever it is that you're learning, and teach yourself if you have to. Don't just say, I can't. That's not the goal here. I know that online learning is hard, but what we're trying to do, and what Lynn has resources to do, and what Larry and I have resources to do, are to empower you and empower your brain to retrain yourself how to study by using these online resources. Okay, why don't we stop and take questions? Larry, do you know if we have any questions?
Right now, we have no questions.
No questions. We've been totally comprehensive.
I don't know what to say, but everybody's, happy with what has been presented and is not confused in asking questions, but we can certainly open it to questions.
Yeah, we will. I mean, please type in questions as you think of them. Before we talk about next week, Lynn, why don't you tell us a little bit more about ways, you were talking about ways to calm yourself or train yourself. Can you talk about those a little bit more?
Sure. So I think it's worth getting into this. I just know a lot of the young people that I work with deal with a fair amount of panic. I have a fair amount of young ladies in particular that have trouble with panic attacks. If your people would like my handout on how to shut down a panic attack, I'm happy to send that to you as a resource and you can disseminate it. That's a learnable, teachable skill. And interestingly, it's just a variation on the spectrum of vagal tone. So vagal tone is the kind of fancy medical lingo for how much fight or flight is your nervous system trending in on average. And then vagal training is training it down so that we have less fight or flight. It's really important, I think, for your cohort to understand that there are a lot of really, really, really intelligent, brilliant people and students in the world. And the thing that really differentiates someone from being brilliant and being world-class, typically, is this issue of vagal tone. There are a lot of people that are excellent golfers, but when they get up to the putt for the $3 million putt, can they take 4 coherent breaths, shut down their fight or flight at will, and perform when the heat is on? And of course, it applies in academic settings or corporate settings. The people that can mitigate and minimize their fight or flight at will really put you in a whole nother caliber. So it's really an important, essential thing. Another thing that's important to understand, most of the students that you're probably helping have what I call fancy brains. A fancy brain, and that's not really, I'm not trying to dismiss the worth or the value of other brains. I have 2 children that are considered special needs, so I love special needs people, and we all have equal value. But I'm sorry, a Porsche is different than a Honda Accord. It just is. And Porsche brains, fancy brains, tend to be hypertrophied, literally, which is a medical term for overgrown. So the distance of the brain being built from the central stalk out to the cortex is bigger. If I could take the cortex off of a fancy brain and iron it out, the size of it will be bigger. All of this leads to the hemispheres being beefier and larger by volume and often in processing power than average. Now that leads to a relative lack of intrahemispheric connectivity. So I'll slow that down and say it again because it's important. People with really fancy brains tend to have basically dual core processors. They got a massive computer here. They got a massive computer here. The 2 massive computers are not as integrated into one seamless supercomputer as they could be or should be. So when you're suggesting that they learn Chinese or French or something with Duolingo, that's phenomenal from a college standpoint. But let me just tell you, it's foundational from a brain building standpoint because languages build intrahemispheric connectivity. And like we were talking before the webinar, so does musical training. So doing things, sports and music and languages that increase intrahemispheric connectivity are really going to help our super brains, fancy brains. But when you have this lack of relative intrahemispheric connectivity, you also tend to have lower vagal tone. If you think about it, I come from, blessed to say, I come from a family of high IQ people. They're all wound up too tight. They're all very, type A, stressed, triple A, type A type people, go, go, go. And so most of these people need to learn that vagal tone piece. So you can train this by working with the breath rate. In the handout, there are some suggestions. Define vagal tone again, please. So this all comes from the term vagus. So V-A-G-U-S is the Latin word for wanderer. And we have cranial nerves in our brain that are like super nerves. The super nerves are as big around like as a pen or a pencil. They're really big fat nerves and they do big things in the body. And the vagus nerve is the 10th cranial nerve. And it comes out of the bottom of the brain, right near the brainstem. And then it has many branches that go into the face, into the carotids, into the heart, into the diaphragm, all throughout the viscera. This one nerve, it's technically a paired nerve, but they refer to it in the singular. This one nerve is the brake on fight or flight. So you're going to be in fight or flight as a default unless your vagus nerve is tonically inhibiting and holding down that fight or flight activity. So when we talk about vagal training or vagal tone, we're talking about how strongly is your 10th cranial nerve able to inhibit fight or flight when the fight or flight is not needed. Does that help? I hope. And interestingly, there are gut health issues that tie into this, which I won't unpack now. Okay, good. So just side tangent, lactobacillus, lactobacilli species, in particular, lactobacillus reuteri and lactobacillus rhamnosus are the 2 species that really, really help upregulate your vagal tone. They upregulate GABA in the brain, and that's inhibitory, which helps with brain function. Are there any other questions? I think I see something here. Would love a copy of the information on how to shut down a panic attack. Okay, sure.
Lynn, can you talk about some of the things that you do with your clients, like some of the exercises or just some of the practices that you do with your clients?
I do so many. In what under what region? I'm not saying that. I don't mean that arrogantly.
Sure. Perhaps maybe with brain training. So maybe with study skills or with a student trying to learn how to perform on a calculus test, just for instance.
Well, I'm really big on assessment. I'm a nurse, and nurses are big on assessment. And so I assess when people come in. Everything I do is really ad hoc and kind of custom and concierge for my clients. So I don't have set protocols. I just assess on the front end, what does this person likely need? For instance, I've had a young person come in a couple of years ago. He had a bad gaming habit, big brain, physically and big IQ. But he really was underperforming, which is pretty classic. And he also had lower, limbic function, which is also really classic. These kinds of fancy brain, smart kids are often very precocious in the head cognitively, and yet limbically and emotionally can be a little bit behind until they're done building, which is later than average. They're not done until they're like 29 or 30. And this young man had processing delays. Well, it wasn't really a processing delay because if you're a fancy brain, it's going through 6 different levels and going to 16 other places that it might not, the information might not go in a regular brain. So it was a normal, but I put him on speed chess. So he and his dad started playing speed chess and kind of really competitively, which is cool. And so that really helped with the processing delays. And then I did a bunch of neuromotor work with balls and things you can do for processing speed issues. So it's really kind of custom, but I can tell you that many of the young people have test anxiety. It's very, very common and understandable. So many of them get an education in this vagal training. There's an app called HeartMath, which I reference in the document that you're going to hand out. And HeartMath, one word, strange name, I know. That's been around a long time. It's evidence-based, and it is vagal training. It's a biofeedback device. You're going to pay for a piece of hardware that clips on the ear, and you can do it on your phone or you can do it on a tablet. And HeartMath teaches you to coherently breathe, where your brain and your heart and your breath are all working in a coordinated unison. And that kind of coordinated unison in the nervous system only happens when you're in rest and digest mode. So HeartMath is an excellent value. You buy the sensor and the hardware, and there's no other fee, and everyone in the family can do it. So I teach and train HeartMath with a lot of folks.
Great. All right. This has been so interesting. I could ask Lynn questions forever. Any other questions?
Brains are cool.
Anything else before we talk about next week? You guys good? Looks like we're good. Okay. All right. Next week, we're going to talk about standardized testing. I know it's on the minds of a lot of people. We're gonna go for it. We're gonna jump in. A lot of colleges are now saying that SATs or ACTs will not be required for admission in the 2021 cycle. We're going to talk about what that means and how that will play a role in admission, or will it play a role in admission. We're going to welcome Anne Marie Chan from Compass Education Group. I consider Compass one of the genius brains, one of the fancy brains in test prep, and we're excited to have her here with us next week to talk about standardized testing and what to expect when it comes to next year, and what to think about helping our children prepare for that. Oh wait, Lynn, we have one more question. Can you see that?
So my children's vagus nerve must not be working because they have no stress, and they seem to not care about grades, especially now that they are remote learning. Do you have suggestions so they will take studying more seriously? Well, yeah, I can unpack that for a little while. Both my kids had special needs. I was a home educator and did homeschooling with my epileptic son. And I actually kind of built his brain. And in the process of all of that, I had to really up my skills as a parent for motivation, because I was asking and at times demanding a lot of my children, and motivation and getting buy-in is really important. So first, I would just like to remind you as a parent that you have a tremendous amount of leverage in a situation that you may not be perceiving. You have a lot more power than you realize. You buy all the food. You buy all the favorite food. You pay for the wireless, the Wi-Fi. You pay for not just the high-speed internet, but the favorite Netflix or whatever is on the TV. You pay for the MacBooks. You pay for all of this stuff. And not only, I really suggest the old-fashioned method of carrots and sticks. And of course, I do not mean sticks literally. I just mean figure out what motivates the child, what do they really, really want, and what do they really not want. And then you pretty much attach, okay, if you really want to do your League of Legends game tonight for 2 hours as a reward for your homeschooling, then this is the standard that's expected. And if you can't do that, then I'm sorry, the house Wi-Fi turns off at 8 p.m. It's that kind of a thing. So if they really, really want to go for a particular outing, or they really want if it's a young lady and she really wants a particular outfit or something, then you attach it as a reward. Ideally, you really want to use way more rewards than punitive negative things. But unfortunately, really, really, really smart children are really, really incredibly manipulative. And they don't mean to be. They're not bad. They're just smart. And so I just find that you really do at times have to play hardball with them. But I think that you need, no one is good at meeting vague standards and expectations. So one very important thing is to get you and your husband, or you and your wife, I'm not sure what setup is there, you and your spouse need to become one unified front, and you need to figure out what is the expectation for each of your children and write it out, in my opinion. Publish it. Publish it in the kitchen in writing. This is what's expected. If you do what's expected, you get all these rewards. If you don't do what's expected, within reason, within this many tries, within this much time frame, you want to always kind of threshold things with kids. So if they're very, very capable, they need tight thresholds of expectation. If they're very incapable, like my special needs son, he has a lot of challenges, he has wide thresholds and a lot of forgiveness. And this is something that needs to be communicated within a family. If there are 3 siblings, why does Johnny get to do something that I don't get to do? Well, maybe it's just because that's the appropriate threshold for him. So communicating that's important. But I would put those kinds of things in writing. That would be those would be some of my suggestions. But figure out what motivates them and get more structured. And the other thing I will tell you that I've learned the hard way, I've been a parent for 28 years and of very, very challenging children, 2 boys, both majorly challenged, gifted and challenged, twice exceptional, as they say. And I can tell you that the other thing is, so back to this, that first of all, you cannot let them divide and conquer, because they will. And the second thing, so you and your husband or you and your wife have to become one seamless entity. And the other thing is consistency. Consistency, consistency, consistency. I worked with Dr. Stephen Butnick for a few years here in town, not professionally. I was a client. Dr. Butnick is a pediatric behavioral psychologist, and he's amazing. And he taught me so many of these skills. And he made me read a book called 1, 2, 3 Magic when my son was little, and that changed my parenting life. And so my 18-year-old son now, I have about 15 years of consistency. When I say it, I mean it. But no, I mean it. And so the good thing is, if you get consistent, you stay consistent, then that also becomes a massive superpower and a leverage, because, even now with my son, if I say something to him, he knows I mean it, because my word's my word, and I say what I mean and I mean what I say. I see so much of that, and I myself was so guilty of that with my older son. The first go round of parenting, I didn't have those skills. I would say things, and then I would I'd kind of, I'd come back off my position, and they will take you down. The kids will take you down with that kind of stuff. So you have to get very, what's really interesting is building an optimal brain for your youth, and mentoring them actually requires that we have optimal brain function, that we get our executive function tip top, and a lot of it. So then you get this compound benefit going, because not only are they going to benefit from the knowledge and the expectations that you're setting, they're going to benefit just from modeling off of you as a mentor. Perfect. I hope that was helpful. It's not easy. I do recommend Dr. Butnick if he's still available, and I do recommend parenting classes and things like that. I learned a lot.
I could agree. That was useful to me too. So yeah. Well, thank you, Lynn. We hope you guys will join us next week to talk about standardized testing. We hope to cover as much as we can about it, and I imagine the landscape will be different next week than it is this week, and we'll continue to stay up to date on all that. We will share the presentation, the recording, as well as Lynn's handout with you. It has terrific information. I think it's, maybe 8 or 10 pages. So you great kind of scientific data that supports all that Lynn shared with us today. And we'll share all of that with you by email. But we thank you for joining us, and have a great week.
Thank you so much. Okay.